So let's start by creating a property line. So we're going to do that under Massing and Site and grab Tool Property Line. We're going to do that by sketching, and we're going to use the rectangle tool. And for this project, we'll do a 200 by 400 plot. Yours can be different, but that's what I'm starting with here. And I'll just position this. We're really not going to use Revit hardly at all for this. So any kind of setup here is really not that critical. Let's go ahead now and start up Dynamo. We'll go to Manage, click on Dynamo, and we're going to start a new document. And what we want to do is import that property line. So we're going to go to Revit. We're going to go to Selection, and we want to go to select a model element, and we'll just peek on over here to our document for a second. And I'm going to go ahead and select those property lines now. So I'm going to click Select. And I just get one when I roll over it, but if I hit Tab, that'll grab all of those. And now we have our property line element in our document, but it's really not showing up yet. So we have to have some way of visualizing those elements. So what I want to do is, well, let me just stop a minute. I'm going to just rename this right away. And I'm going to get into that habit just so it helps us have a little more clarity. So instead of selecting model element, I'm going to call it property line. And that's the input for grabbing that up. And we're going to now do a function where we take the element and convert it into curves. And I'm just going to use a shortcut for that. Dot curves. And if you look at the description of this, it's got an input of element and it outputs curves. So this is really just giving Dynamo a tangible of this property line that we've input. And the minute I do, you'll notice in the background those element curves show up. Our problem here though is that these are 4 separate items. They're 4 lines. We really want to combine them. And there's a function for doing that. And I'll once again do the shortcut. It's polycurve. Dot by join curve. So a lot of these things are always a little cryptic at the beginning. Hopefully you'll get the basic concept here is you have singular elements and there's functions for bringing those all together. And we can actually, one of the ways to help yourself out is actually to not do these shortcuts anymore. So there's geometry, modifiers to geometry, and you can go in and then start to individually search for the certain kinds of, like for instance, we're working with curves, and there should be modifiers for this, polycurve, and there's the first one is by join curves. So keep in mind I'm doing shortcuts to make it a little more speedy at the first part of this evaluation or setup. And one other thing we need to do, and this is a setup for our eventual going into generative design, is kind of capture this data. So there's this idea of data, remember, and this is related to what we're going to do with using this data in generative design coming up. So we're going to plug that into there. And now we have that join curve, and I'd like to give it, I'm going to hold the escape key here, and that allows me to zoom out so we can see this whole, we can manipulate this whole shape, and then I can let off the escape and we come back to our node analysis or our node tools. One of the things I want to do is give this a color right away just for clarity. So I'm going to use, it's called geometry color. And it's geometry by geometry color. And we're going to plug this in. We won't really see a change yet because we actually need a color. I'm going to pull this up here and we're going to grab a tool that allows us to create color. And it's by ARGB. And I'm forgetting what alpha, that's transparency value. and we just need to input some kind of numbers, and it's always from 0 to 256, or I think it's from 0 to 255 because 0 is one of the digits. So in the code block, I'm going to, well, first of all, type in for code block so we get it. And then in there, I'm going to enter the number 255. And I'm going to plug that into, let's say, red. Plug that into the color red. Now this is probably showing up, but you can't see it because we need to take the previews off of the other elements here. So I'm going to make these disappear by right-clicking on them and unchecking the preview box. And data, remember, is still probably passing through, so we'll hide that. And there we have our red polygon line. So we'll actually break right there, and I'll pick up on creating the space as a UV space, and I'll describe that in the next clip.